Hey, I'm Marshall.
And I'm Anna, and it's such a privilege for us to be with you on Good Friday.
Absolutely. Today is the day that we slow down and take a look at how Jesus gave his life for us.
What kind of car would Jesus drive? A Chrysler! Today, we're remembering a time when heaven and earth were rocked by something. Before I tell you all about that, I want to let you know that our series is The Rock, and it's about the rock, the foundation of our lives, Jesus. And in today's story, we learn about something both horribly sad and something really wonderful that happens. And it's the same thing happening. I know that sounds strange, but it's a big one for us to wrap our minds around. In today's story, we learn that Jesus was killed. And while his death was horrible and sad, it made possible all the most wonderful things for us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, while Jesus lived a life of over 30 years on earth, during his last few years he gathered disciples and showed them what God's kingdom was all about. However, what Jesus was revealing about God's kingdom really rubbed religious leaders the wrong way. There were certain things that the religious leaders felt so attached to that it didn't matter who said something else, they were not going to listen. In fact, even Jesus' miracles didn't convince these leaders that he was the Son of God. Instead, it made them angrier at him. And so they did all they could to have him killed. This began with Jesus being arrested one night while he was with his disciples praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. As he prayed there, Judas came with a group of armed men, and Judas kissed Jesus on the cheek. That was a signal to the group which man to arrest. They took Jesus to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest. There was a whole council of leaders with him. They tried to get people to lie about Jesus and say he had broken God's law. Then the high priest said, "Tell us if you are the Messiah, the rescuer, the Son of God." Jesus answered, "You have said it, and you will see me seated at God's right hand." That was all they needed to hear. They didn't believe him. They thought he deserved to die. They spit on his face and beat him. Early on Friday morning, they tied him up and led him to the governor, Pilate. Pilate tried to talk with Jesus for a little while, but he would not say anything about the charges against him. Pilate did not believe Jesus deserved to die, so he allowed the crowd to make a choice. He offered to release Jesus or a well-known prisoner named Barabbas. The crowd shouted for Barabbas to be released. Then Pilate asked the crowd what should be done with Jesus. The crowd shouted, "Crucify him." Pilate said, "Why? What has he done?" But the people yelled louder for his death. Pilate handed Jesus over to be hung on a cross. Before he was taken to the cross, the soldiers put a purple robe on Jesus and a crown made of thorns. They put a stick in his hand and mocked him, saying, "Hail the King of the Jews." After this, they put his own clothes back on him and led him out of the city. On the way there, a man named Simon was forced to carry Jesus' cross. Finally, they got to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They nailed him to the cross and divided up his clothes. The soldiers sat down and watched over him. Above his head they wrote, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 criminals were killed alongside him, one on his right and one on his left. People passed by Jesus and made fun of him. Soon, though, heaven and earth would be rocked by his death. From noon until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everything was covered in darkness. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus shouted out, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you deserted me?" Because he was speaking in a language different than the crowd, they thought he was calling out for Elijah, but they misunderstood. Then, after Jesus cried out again, he died. Let's read what happens next in Matthew. At that moment, the temple curtain was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook. The rocks split. Tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs. After Jesus was raised from the dead, they went into the holy city. There they appeared to many people. The Roman commander and those guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened. They were terrified. They exclaimed, "He was surely the Son of God." The temple curtain was torn in two from top to bottom. From top to bottom. That curtain was huge, and it was meant to separate where God's presence lived and where people were. The barrier between God and people had been removed. And that wasn't all. The earth shook. There was an actual earthquake. Rocks split in two. Jesus' death rocked the earth. But it didn't end there. People who had died were raised to life. Jesus' death rocked heaven and earth. Everywhere felt the impact of his death. even the Roman commander and those guarding Jesus said that he must be the Son of God. You see, Jesus' death, while incredibly sad in the moment, actually caused the barrier between people and God as a result of sin to be removed. This changed everything. So while today feels like a somber or sad day of remembrance, the truth is that today is also a day to celebrate the incredibly, unbelievable, earth-shattering gift that Jesus gave to us as he took on all the evil of the world in his death on the cross. In fact, God's greatest expression of love looks very different than any expression of love we imagine today, but it is the only type of love that truly rocks heaven and earth. My name's Paige, I had a blast, and I'll talk to you soon.
Wow, it is tough to hear what Jesus went through, but amazing that he gave his life for us.
Yeah, and he expressed his love in a way that changed the world forever.
And it's so true, like the big idea said, Jesus' death rocked heaven and earth. He didn't stay dead. He came back to life and removed the barrier between God and us. And that is so amazing.
It really is. Well, it's time to break off into our small groups, so let's talk about what this looks like in our lives.
See ya.